Today we're going to be talking about the case of Breonna Taylor.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of been a lot of activism on the subject. A lot of people talking about it. It's been sort of a hot topic for really 6 months now, and I was going to kind of go over some quote unquote facts, some stuff that Your Highness and myself tried to put together. And, there's obviously huge differences of opinion across the spectrum. And so what we tried to do was approach it with, a methodology that would kind of be objective as possible. And so I'm going to kind of get into that real quick, and then we'll lead into the actual timeline itself. So we tried to figure out what sources stand where, and there seems to be a consensus that this chart that you guys are seeing right now sort of kind of lays out where the different news outlets stand on these different issues. Can you guys see the infographic?
Yeah.
So this is sort of like the generally accepted breakdown of the bias of media coverage. And so where my mouse is going left to right now, this axis is sort of political orientation and bias, right? So the further left you go is obviously more, liberal leaning, and the further you go right, the more conservative leaning. And then on the y-axis, which is going up and down, is sort of the depth of reporting and the reliability of that reporting, right? So we really wanted to be near the center, obviously, ideally. And then, as high up on this thing as possible in terms of reliability. Now, in a perfect world, I'm going to go to the next slide here. We would have wanted to have been somewhere in this area. So this green box you guys are seeing, this is like the maximum of reliability and depth of reporting. And then within that, we were trying to use sources that were, within 5.5 of dead center. And so you can see we chose USA Today and the Wall Street Journal. The problem was when we started going through these sources, there really wasn't a lot of in-depth reporting on the timeline for right of center publications. So these publications were covering elements of the case, updates in the case, some information about what's happened sort of since the incident itself. But since tonight, on this call, we were going to focus on sort of just like the incident itself, because that's so, highly disputed and such a volatile issue, and there's enough to talk about there. And so what we're going to be going over today, unfortunately, comes mostly from USA Today, which, is still in this sort of green box of, very, very reliable reporting and very in-depth reporting. And so there was, Your Highness had provided considerably more links. However, the depth of the reporting on this was already a lot. And then, unfortunately, like everything else that we were able to look at was either not in the depth of reporting, or it was just like more redundant, more stuff on the left that we already had. So I felt like the USA Today one was the one that was worth sticking with, because it was based on the initial reports by the local paper, and then they did their whole investigation themselves in addition to that, to verify a lot of the information. So I think what we're going to see here is pretty reliable. And they did a pretty good job of flagging, who is alleging information versus what has been proven thus far.
I do got Charles, that the illustration you're giving us, as far as with the media, what source, who's orchestrated this chart?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if you look on the very top,
Fonts Media. Okay.
Yeah, and they go into their methodology pretty in depth. And I looked around on the internet, and there seemed to be some consensus that this is legit. Furthermore, I think just
Okay.
from the people in this room being relatively intelligent, I mean, if you look at where they're alleging these different sources to be, this looks about right. We're within a standard deviation, right? I mean, if you've got like over here, if you've got Breitbart on the far right of the spectrum, right, and then you've got MSNBC on this side, right? Like, I don't think anyone's contesting this stratification. I mean, there might be some nuance, right, that people would debate about some of these, but for the most part, this is, I think, what people would expect to see.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, just check.
So I guess let's kind of get into it here. So I don't want to like read these to you if I can avoid it. I tried to make the bullet points.
Also,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I want to chime in real quick. This is obviously a popular case. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody has been hearing Breonna Taylor's name since she was killed by law enforcement, like Charles was saying a few months ago. So, and all these sources, like we said, just to kind of fill in a lot of gaps. Just like an example, myself personally, through this research right now, I was able to gain a lot of details of the case that I just didn't know. One, I'm not that glued, honestly, personally, to news like that, and two, just seeing it from afar, it was just another narrative. So it's a different aspect, a different perspective for me. So getting into this case and just getting all these details, and you would see, it's a lot of conflicting reports, like with anything, and really trying to examine it to see, let us examine it thoroughly and come to our conclusion from what information that we're getting and surveying through what we think really happened and what's really going on in relation to everything as well. So like me and Charles talked amongst ourselves, we're not investigative reporters, or gather. We're just trying to gather much information as we can to try to be, like you said, as objective as we can, and we can have a straightforward, real, honest conversation about it. So.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I think one of the most important realizations that Your Highness and I had discussing this issue leading up to today is that this information we're going to present, we obviously want it to be as accurate as possible, but it's almost not it's not imperative, or it's not like a deal breaker if it's imperfect, because what's most important is that we can take, okay, well, hypothetically, if this is true, then we can make this inference, and the like subsequent dialogue that follows, as opposed to a trial of this information of whether it's legit or not. I mean, that's not what we're here to do. What we're here to do is sort of take anecdote and say, okay, well, like, assuming that's true, like, what can we infer from it? And then if it's not, then this is what we can. And that debate and that discussion, I think, is way more important than trying to figure out whether or not these facts are the absolute true facts or not.
I agree. Okay.
So if we get right into it here, we go a little bit before the actual day of the raid, right? I don't know if you guys can just sort of read this at your own pace, or I can kind of read it. It doesn't matter. Your Highness, what do you think is the best play here?
I can read it off, or you can read it off. Go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, there is an homicide investigation going on, or excuse me, narcotics investigation that's happening in the area. And there's a home in which police are concerned there's a drug activity or whatever. And so they have a person of interest, Mr. Glover, and they allege to be able to confirm that he's been receiving packages at Breonna's house. They say that they've seen him with packages there in his hand, and then they were able to verify that additional packages were going to that address, but being addressed to Mr. Glover.
Now, and also, let's give it a insight. His name, Jamarcus Glover. He is allegedly, from reports, her ex-boyfriend, and he's the main suspect in which the local law enforcement, Louisville Metro Police Department, was investigating on, drug allegation and drug charges. So, they're targeting him. So this is everything that they're including, the information Charles getting to lead into. It was in the affidavit that they used to actually get the warrant to get signed and then go in. So we're just leading up to that point.
Exactly. They also claim to have seen Mrs. Taylor's vehicle at the residence in which the alleged drug activity is taking place. So there's two distinct properties here: Mrs. Taylor's property, and then the property at which they believe the actual transactions themselves are taking place. And then 2 days before the raid itself, police claim that their informant was able to actually purchase drugs at this alleged trap house.
Which is a different address than Breonna Taylor's apartment.
Right. So there's two different addresses here: Miss Taylor's, and then what the police will refer to as the quote unquote trap house throughout the investigation.
Out of curiosity, what is the drug in question? Has that been identified?
That hasn't been identified until later on in the timeline. We will touch on that once everything kind of plays out. But from what I saw, the USA Today did not tell us that they had exact knowledge of which narcotics were there. Now they may have, that could have been omitted. But like I said, USA Today did not touch on whether or not the police had identified specific narcotics that they were in question of. So the person who is spearheading this investigation, go ahead.
Quick question: Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yeah. Okay.
What is there a reason we might get into this later? But is there a reason that they would gain a warrant to Breonna's house as opposed to where the drugs? Because unless I missed something,
well, we're going to get there, Rich.
Okay, all right, got it.
Yeah. So, and just to, for what it's worth, Breonna's car allegedly was identified at the quote unquote drug house multiple times. So that's where, and then they claim that this gentleman, Mr. Glover, was receiving packages at her house as well. So Mr. Glover is the primary suspect of the trap house in question. And then he's spotted at Miss Taylor's house, and Breonna's vehicle is spotted at his house, allegedly. This is all what police are saying. Yep. Now, the person who's spearheading all of this is Detective J. James. J is the first initial. So he, on the 12th, he requests and ends up ultimately receiving warrants for both Miss Taylor's home and the said trap house for the narcotics investigation. So on these warrants are actually Breonna Taylor, one Mr. Adrian Walker, and Mr. Jamarcus Glover. The warrant that actually is just for the trap house names Mr. Walker and Mr. Glover and several other gentlemen. However, that warrant does not mention Miss Taylor. So basically, Mr. Walker and Mr. Glover are on both warrants, and then Miss Taylor is only on the one for her home. Now, Matt, maybe you can weigh in here because I don't know much about this issue, but when someone's name is on the warrant, does that mean that they will arrest this person when they execute the warrant? Matt's background in criminal, what is it? What is your bachelor's in, Matt?
I don't think I could weigh in with a high degree of credibility or accuracy here. And I imagine it would vary by jurisdiction as well. So I don't think I have anything objective to contribute to that. Sorry.
Understood. Yeah, I don't know the significance of somebody's name being on the warrant because I imagine these are search warrants. So I don't know if that means that anything above and beyond that they can search that property.
Yeah, of my knowledge, if it's a strictly search warrant, then they're coming in to search the property and go from there. It's different than an arrest warrant. I'm not the expert on the criminal, just know from my knowledge and experience.
Yeah, understood. Same here.
Generally attached to an identity because that's the whole premise for the investigation. It gives you access to the space, I think, but that's nice.
Yeah, I guess that makes them quote unquote persons of interest. So either way, the day of, which is March 13th, so they got these warrants on the 12th and they executed them on the 13th. But basically at 12:30 in the morning, police arrive at Taylor's home. Pretty much no one disputes that. But you'll see highlighted in yellow here are the disputed pieces of information. So police claim to knock and announce their presence and to not get a response from within inside of Miss Taylor's home. Mr. Walker, who was also in the home, claims that he and Miss Taylor both asked people outside to identify themselves and that they didn't get a response. Witnesses that were provided by Mr. Walker's attorney also claim that the police did not announce their presence.
Yeah,
Police ultimately,
just elaborate.
please. Yeah,
Just elaborate a little further in that details. It was someone that claimed that they a neighbor that they heard the police announce themselves coming in, but they actually changed their story. Initially, they say they did not, and then they changed it and say they did. There were 11, according to Mr. Kenneth Walker, which is Breonna Taylor's boyfriend at the time, which was in the home, or also, of course, with Breonna Taylor. His attorneys, like Charles was saying, that they actually, according to the records, got 11 residents, 11 neighbors, which stated they didn't hear anything at all. The police announced themselves; they just came in. So that ratio was an 11-to-1 on that particular level of what's going on as far as the knock versus no knock.
Ultimately, police end up using a battering ram to open the door. Walker places a call to 911.
Quick question.
No one yeah.
So it's my understanding of this particular case, and again, I'm sure it's by jurisdiction. I don't know that it's across the board, but the type of warrant that they had didn't require the police to knock.
Correct.
I don't know what significance that holds in it. I'm sure as we start talking about it, that might become relevant, but just my understanding and what I've heard is that the specific sort of warrant that they got did not require the police to actually knock before they entered.
That's correct.
Yeah.
They had a quote unquote no knock warrant.
Yes, but then actually in the case which will lead up to as well, law enforcement they claim that they actually did announce themselves.
Yeah, despite not needing to, they said that they did.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Yeah, and I just want to correct something real quick. They were initially issued a no-knock warrant. The orders were changed before the raid, so they did have to knock and announce themselves. Police did have to identify themselves. They were originally given a no-knock. It was changed before the raid, so they did have to identify themselves, which is why...
Did they receive that update before they executed the warrant?
Correct, they did. And that's why a lot of the, I don't know if you heard any of the grand jury testimony that was released yesterday, that's why a lot of it was focused on the fact, a lot of the police officers saying that they did announce themselves. And
they were stressing that because they didn't want to be in trouble for violating the warrant.
Yeah, and I actually didn't hear about that, Adam. About
I
didn't
hear
hear that they're gonna change. That's one thing that we're gonna see as we go through this. It's like anything else, there's a lot of discrepancy. Because you basically got two sides. So we'll get into that as we go. But yeah.
And I think Your Highness and I were so focused on the original sort of scandal itself, right? Because the outrage began in the community well before anybody was debating knock, no knock, any of this stuff, right? Like the sort of incendiary tragedy was this woman's death at the hands of police, and this is almost a sort of a secondary debate about police conduct after the fact. Because they started to investigate the murder, right? And then now, I think obviously some things have unfolded since. I should say they're investigating the death as a possible murder, and then obviously now we're seeing these other things unfold. But so my apologies if we skipped some of those updates, because we were focused very much on the original case.
No worries, man.
And also, I did see with a grand jury. Is it a testimony grand jury or I don't know?
There was audio that was released.
They released it yesterday. They said it was like 15 to 20 hours.
Yeah. I didn't listen to. Clearly, I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I just listened to snippets of it. And there's a good portion of it where the police are spending a good amount of time talking about how they effectively ramped up their approach. They started, they knocked, then they got louder, and then eventually they were like effectively like screaming that, you know, when they came in, police. At least that's their accounting of
What
it.
they
Yeah,
allege,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Right. That's their accounting. Yeah.
So what we don't know is, right, so allegedly Walker places a call to 911 and says that he's concerned about a home invasion. Now, we don't know if that was before or after the police entered, and we don't know if that's before or after shots were fired.
Well, just in my estimation, I would think it has to be before, because if shots are fired and the police come in, I don't see
Right.
it.
I don't see how that's possible either.
I don't see how they stop you. Like, let me call 911 real quick. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, once people start shooting, like, nobody's picking up a phone to do anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for this
Yeah.
one, I believe it's actually after, because based on what was said on the 911 call, I haven't heard it, but I saw part of like the transcripts from, I can't remember if it was like the New York Times or where I read it, but effectively, Walker was said in his line, it was something like, you know, someone broke in my house and shot my girlfriend, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but
I see. So it could be an emergency call sort of thing once she was already shot.
yeah, I think this was after, when the shots were exchanged. Because from my understanding, you know, and I'll let you go through the facts, but he shot, you know, heard someone come in, shots came in, she was hit. He pulls up the phone and he's like, "Hey, my girlfriend's been shot. Blah 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 blah. Get in here." At least that's the last accounting that I had read on the New York Times.
Does anyone know if the firearm that Mr. Walker had was legally owned or not?
He's a legal
It was.
firearm.
Yeah.
It was
legally
a licensed and legally owned firearm.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I know we going through the timeline. Just that particular fact, like you said, there was report Adam that was old. I mean, just me being involved and seeing things and law. I don't see how, you know, allegedly they shoot her, kill her, a bunch of shots going. So when they stop, he gets on the. They let him. They let him call. Like, I don't see he was already deemed in the criminal spot. You know, I don't see them letting a person that's in the criminal spot, maybe allegedly involved in criminal activity, after a bunch of shots ring out, that he actually gets the space for getting called without getting handcuffed or anything.
I don't know that they were actually in the room at the time when it happened. I don't think. I mean, because based on what they were saying, he said it's clear he didn't know who was doing it, right? Because he was like, someone broke into my house and shot my girlfriend, right? So like, if he saw the police officers there, he'd been like, hey, you know, cops came in here, shot her in the face or wherever she was shot.
Yeah. Allegedly, I mean, like, from my reports, and we might lead up to this too. Like, they were in the bed, they heard the knocking, they got out of the bed. Like Charles said, she asked who is it a couple of times. She got shot in the hallway standing up. They said they actually came out of the bedroom, like to the quote unquote living room hallway area. So you know, they were facing each other. I mean, I just don't see it. Like I said, of course I wasn't there. I'm just going through. I didn't know that fact there about that, even with this about not clear if it was before or after. When I saw after, like, somebody got killed next to you, was a bunch of shots ringing out. I don't see how the police don't at least apprehend you once they're in now. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know.
I mean, largely anecdotally, from what I understand, part of what made this even more controversial was it was kind of a blind fire dynamic where the cops couldn't even see what they were shooting at. They were just literally spraying up her apartment. So, you know, I could, you know, I mean, based on my limited knowledge of this sort of thing, I could imagine like an exchange of fire and then this like awkward silence and lull in activity, which I could see would create a moment to like place an emergency phone call. But, you know, like I said, anecdotal.
Yeah, there's two things I'd like to flag, which is, number one, intentionally so what we're going to present is, at least initially, is like sort of a bare bones sort of account of some of this stuff, just because there is so much debate about some of the nuance. And obviously, you know, if you guys have updates, please do continue to weigh in with those updates about the nuance. And then unrelatedly, I do want to also flag that it is feasible, however unlikely, right, that after realizing it's the police, it might be a good time to call the police and play the card of, somebody of who I don't know is like trying to enter my home. Because if you've already fired a round at police, I'd rather the police not know that I knew it was them. right? That serves me to be naive about who was coming in, right? Like, because if you say, okay, I know that's the police and I shot at them knowingly, that's going to be a worse situation for yourself.
But you also have to think, Charles, this is someone who they believe to be a criminal, who they broke into his house.
Oh, absolutely.
Who if they're
could also be expecting a home invasion. So I totally understand the other possibility.
Well, that too, but I just meant more from the fact of if you've got, if this was face to face, right, and he was trying to cover for himself after the fact, and he was shooting in front of the police, he knew it was police. His charges were dropped in May. How often do you see black dudes with criminal backgrounds who shoot a police officer in the leg getting their charges dropped pretty soon after this happens, right? Like that's not a thing that happens. And the reason that probably happened is because the prosecutor was probably pretty skeptical of the fact that he thought that he could charge him based on what happened.
Yeah. I'm just flagging the probable motive because we're considering all the possible elements.
Yeah,
I think everyone on this call, I'd be surprised if anyone on this call was in disagreement about probably what actually took place. I'm just trying to flag all the possibilities because I don't want it to just be an assumption.
Quick question, guys. Is there a reason why the 911 call that Walker placed is not available? It's my understanding that those were always recorded. Is there something that I don't understand why that wouldn't be available?
Adam says it was available.
Yeah, I know I don't know if you can hear it, but I know that probably you can now with the release of the grand jury transcript or audio transcript. But yeah, like what I saw, I didn't hear it. I saw like the transcript from that portion. That's why I said that's why I thought that he must have been. I didn't know it was in the hallway. I thought they were actually still in the room. So I learned something there. But I think it was probably when he was in the hallway, based on what was said on the call, because he had already kind of noted that she had gotten shot and that someone had broken into his house. If it was police, he probably would have said that, right?
Got it.
Yeah, I can just, like I said.
Yeah, so here's the Courier Journal. I didn't plan on looking this up in the middle of it, but the Courier Journal is the local newspaper that initially reported on any of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't weigh in on the legitimacy of the source, but if USA Today was like using them as their base source, I'm sure it's okay. But they say that here's the quotation: "Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend." So they are alleging that it took place. That sounds like it took place after the shots were fired.
Interesting.
That is very. I would have never guessed that. I don't see how like a bunch of shots fired. That's interesting. How that? I don't see how that can happen.
Well, right. Especially and maybe the way this shakes out,
being rattled out.
Yeah,
with that many bullets going out. So and all of a sudden,
but if he's ducking underneath a bed or underneath something, shooting,
that's right, because it is random. That's right, because they were not actually aiming at anyone in particular. They were just shooting. But then too, would you hear the bullets in the call? Shots fired in the call.
Yeah, he must have stopped.
Was there silence?
Yeah.
Was there silence behind him?
I can picture, right, like Matt said, like the door comes in, in some order, bullet goes out, several bullets go in, and then it's like everyone's kind of like, anyone still alive in there kind of thing? Like
right.
And here's the thing. I think we're gonna find as we go through this timeline that like expertise in the execution of this warrant is not that high.
Yeah.
This is not like SEAL Team 6, right?
No,
first of all, it's only 3 guys, right? And we know that they're not SEAL Team 6. So I think you'll see how a lull would be possible given the level of expertise of the warrants serving. So we know for a fact Walker fires 1 round. This will be alleged to have hit Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly in the upper left thigh. I think later on this ends up being debated about whether they can prove that was his gun that wounded him. Police return fire multiple times. The number of times that they shoot is also up for debate, but we know that it's like above dozen. Like it's a lot of shots. Walker's attorney would claim that bullet holes were also found in adjacent homes. And Walker's attorney also claims that police fired not only from within Taylor's apartment after battering ramming the door, but also from a window of the home.
Yeah, that was the officer that got charged with the wanted endangerment, Hankinson.
Which I'm not an expert, but that sounds reckless. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Yeah, reportedly they say Officer Hankinson. Reason why was they wanting endangerment. She shot over 10 shots from outside of a sliding glass door with the blinds drawn, so he couldn't see, and and that was part of the reason why it was like wanting endangerment. Like he was basically just shooting, according to reports.
And I think that's also why they fired him pretty summarily, right? Like I think they recognized that that was
that's open shut case.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you're
they're
tripping.
pretty much like, this guy's an idiot.
Yeah. And then 1 a.m. So remember, they arrived at 12:30. So by 1 a.m., Walker is arrested on attempted murder of a police officer, and no drugs are ultimately found in Miss Taylor's home. Simultaneously, at the alleged trap house, they execute the warrant there. Did somebody just jump in? No, okay. Here's one thing that was interesting. First of all, they seemed to apprehend Mr. Glover without any shots being fired. But USA Today felt the need to mention that on the arrest certificate for Mr. Glover, the time sort of start of the incident of the arrest is at like 12, or is it like 12:40? But then his actual arrest is listed as 2:43 a.m. And I don't know if that's just like the lull and like issuing the paperwork, or if that's a discrepancy worth noting, but USA Today felt the need to mention those two different times on the arrest certificate. The evidence log says that they recovered from that house a sizable amount of money, marijuana, crack cocaine, different types of pills, codeine, which is like the narcotic found in cough syrups, baggies, surveillance cameras, and firearms. And then sometime around like 3 a.m., the police do hold a press conference, and they claim that the officers only fired because they were fired upon, and they claim that Mr. Walker is the suspect for shooting a police officer.